Okay, so that's the argument, that's the problem for physicalism. Let's see what the objections to the argument are. So we're just going to look at one main one, and we're going to jump to another one, and I'm going to try and situate where both of those lie in the kind of logical space of objections that can be made to this argument. This argument has generated a vast literature, believe it or not, but it has. Okay, so here's one. This is the other Lewis, our friend David Lewis. We've come across before. And he says, look, if you have this new kind of experience, you gain abilities to remember and imagine. So after you've tasted Vegemite, you learn what it's like, and you can afterward remember the experience you had. And by remembering how it once was, you can afterward imagine such an experience. Further, he says, you gain an ability to recognize the same experience when it comes along again. And you also gain the ability to imagine related experiences that you've never had. So for example, after tasting Vegemite for the first time, you might become able to imagine tasting Vegemite ice cream, something that I discovered actually exists. I haven't tasted it yet, but I can imagine what it tastes like now that I have finally tasted Vegemite. I tasted it again last night just to make sure. Preparation for today's lecture. Tasted a bit of Vegemite, went to Woolworths, bought a jar, gave my wife some for the first time. Should have taken a picture of her because she was worse than this guy. She really made a terrible grimace. And it's pretty astonishing stuff. Like, what do you do with it? I don't know how to eat it except like take a spoonful, but I'm guessing that's the wrong way if our reaction was anything to go by. Small quantities, I'm guessing, is a good guideline, not large spoonfuls like I had. Okay, well, I had that spoonful of Vegemite last night, and whoa, I mean, I can remember that thing. And I think I'd recognize it again if it came along. And I think I can imagine what Vegemite ice cream. It's kind of a horrible thing. I wish I didn't have that ability. But now I have it. I can't make it go away. I can imagine what Vegemite ice cream tastes like. And I guess it's what I'll be made to eat forever when I go to hell. Okay, so Lewis's idea here is that the ability hypothesis says that knowing what an experience is like is just the possession of these kinds of abilities. To remember what it was like, to imagine and recognize what it's like. It's not the possession of any kind of new information. Okay? So on this objection, it's not knowing that something is the case, propositional knowledge, knowing that some proposition is the case. It's knowing how, like knowing how to ride a bicycle. And so he says it should be no surprise that lessons won't teach you what an experience is like. Lessons impart information, propositional knowledge. But ability is something else. I can learn all of the information there is, the physics, the physiology of riding a bicycle. But until I actually get on the thing and start to figure out how to keep my balance and keep forward momentum and so on, I won't know what it's like. But it's not like I'm gaining any new information, Lewis is saying. I'm just gaining an ability. Now you can see, if that's right, then the objection to the argument is that Mary doesn't gain any new knowledge, any propositional knowledge. She just gains an ability with regard to knowledge that she already had. And so there's no threat to physicalism at all. So that's the first kind of objection that you can make to the knowledge argument. Thoughts briefly on that sort of objection? So let's just situate this objection. And in the process look at a more recent and more subtle kind of objection. So I'm going to go through this, and don't get too alarmed, but I'm just going to sort of put up the logical structure of how people have tended to respond to this argument. So we've got the question here, does Mary learn anything or gain any new information, any propositional knowledge when she first experiences red? Now some people say no here, okay? Churchland thinks that our knowledge, because our knowledge falls so short of what we're imagining Mary would have. She has all of the physical information. We don't have that yet. And because our knowledge falls so short of what we're imagining she would have, it's difficult to say what she would or wouldn't understand. Okay, so in that case, she doesn't gain maybe any new information, and in that case, physicalism wouldn't be refuted. Most philosophers are willing to grant, well, it does seem like she does learn something new, and that would seem to pose a problem. So they don't go that simple way to say that right from the get-go she doesn't learn anything new. But if we say that she does learn something new, we have to ask what kind of knowledge she gains, what new knowledge she has. Is it strictly know-how, or does it include knowledge that? So knowledge of facts, propositions, information, so on. Now we've seen Lewis's objection here. It's the, it was the first kind of serious non-Churchland style objection to the argument, and he says that it's just strictly know-how. She only acquires new abilities to recognize and imagine. Okay. No new knowledge of facts, propositions, and information. But not everyone has agreed with Lewis. It seems to many people who even otherwise would be inclined towards physicalism that Mary does gain new knowledge of facts, propositions, and information. And in that case, you've got to ask, well, see, does she or doesn't she? You've already granted maybe that you're not going to go with Lewis's objection. So some people will say, well, she comes to know or represent in a new way facts or propositions that she already knew. So it's not just that she's gained know-how. She's gained something else, and it's this. It's just this ability to represent in a new way facts that she already knew. Now, that might be some sort of, basically she's using some sort of non-linguistic biological representation system, say, to represent stuff that she already represented in a different way, linguistically, with her full propositional knowledge of physics or something like that. So in having her native abilities to see red fired up for the first time, as it were, she represents in a new way stuff that she already knew, but she doesn't gain, strictly speaking, any new propositional knowledge. So that's one sort of view defended by Terry Horgan. But some people have thought, well, you know, it is tempting at least here to think that she does come to know new facts, propositions, or information. It's not just that she gains a new ability, like Lewis says, or that she just represents in a new way by having her visual system fired up by access to the outside world, and she's representing old stuff she knew in a new way, but she actually learns something new, or something, new information. Yeah?
What if you said she does learn something new, but learning is just like creating new concepts?
Well, we'll see in a moment. It depends on how the story goes in the details, but if she learns anything new, strictly speaking, propositional knowledge or information like that, that's going to be a problem for physicalism. Okay, so I just want you to see from this that the main thing that any person trying to defend physicalism is going to have to do is grant as much as possible that seems intuitive about the Mary case. That, yeah, okay, it seems like she does learn something new, even something propositional, but then resist the move to physicalism being refuted. So I couldn't fit everything on here, so we'd have to jump to the next slide, and we've just left things from here, possibly refuted. Now, we get all kind of complex here when it comes to whether we have fine-grained or coarse-grained modes of individuating propositions. We don't need to get too hung up on that. Roughly speaking, all I'm saying here is that on a fine-grained method of individuating propositions, Mary might acquire a new concept, partly on the basis of her new discriminative abilities. So she does have some new representational system fired up, and in virtue of that, she also gains a new concept. Now, if the concept has propositional structure, then she gains a new proposition. She's able to grasp the truth of a new proposition, partly on the basis of having her new discriminative abilities. On a coarse-grained mode of individuating propositions, it's fairly coarse-grained. It's just, something like the proposition that 5 plus 7 is 12 is the same proposition that 38 is the square root of 1,444, just because they're both true in all possible worlds or something. Now, the reason that on the fine-grained mode of individuating propositions you don't get a refutation of physicalism is that even if Mary came to know a new proposition, she acquires that new concept in part on the basis of her new discriminative abilities. And that'll give her the ability to grasp the truth of new propositions, but Van Gulik at least argues that it's not a threat to physicalism. But things do get fairly fine-grained here. And it's only if we can push towards this coarse-grained individuation of propositions that you end up having physicalism refuted. Now, the only reason I'm mapping all of that out, because it's not really easy to make sense of the other reading that we had for today unless we do. So the Raffman article, she is sort of situating herself between these two replies to the argument. And she's saying, well, look, we might end up having new discriminative abilities onto which concepts don't map properly. Physicalism could be true, but still we would have some way of not being able to eliminate qualia. So the materialist line is just that subjective facts don't exist. It's different ways of knowing or representing or whatever physical facts. Now, she's making an empirical claim here, actually, for doubting the materialist line, which involves the memory constraint. And we're short of time, so we'll just go over it quickly. Basically, here's the problem. It seems, from empirical work, that we can discriminate more shades of a color than we can re-identify over time. So we don't seem to be able to remember, but we can actually pick them out and distinguish them when we're just presented with them. But without the ability to re-identify, we don't form concepts for them in any meaningful sense. And so we also can't investigate them, she thinks, scientifically in repeated trials. So the idea here is that physicalism here could be true, but we still might not be able to reduce or eliminate subjective facts for this methodological reason. So just jumping briefly back to that thing here, it's not that physicalism will be refuted, but we're still going to end up, in a sense, because we won't get concepts mapping on neatly to our new discriminative abilities. It seems like there will be this ineliminable subjectivity to our experience. Okay, so the bottom line, does Mary learn a new fact? It's not clear. People disagree about it, and it gets fairly complex. So at least on some standard ways of looking at it, denying that she does learn a new fact, those objections fail. Basically, the materialist ends up owing us some kind of an account of our introspective mode of representing qualitative properties. What that means is just when we have discriminative abilities to pick apart colors in experience, what's the story that we tell about the relation between those qualitative experiences and concepts, which will have propositional structure? If there's some meaningful sense in which they come apart, then it may be that physicalism is false. Okay, so just leaving you with a couple of suggestions for anybody who wants to go wild and do further reading on this. I'll post that later on. You can check this out later on too. The thing I alerted you at the beginning, that there may be differences between how the different people are thinking about qualia. You'll see that Raffman's way of thinking about it is substantially different from Lewis's, while still having some similarities, and similarly for the abilities between David Lewis and Raffman. But next week we'll go further into the problem of qualia by looking at how the absence of qualia in a functionally identical creature, namely a philosophical zombie, might be a threat to physicalism, and would also look at Nagel's article on what it's like to be a bat.